Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in the clown decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And today we have perfect examples of exactly how the mainstream media help stir up, quite frankly, mass hysteria in people, because once again we are going on to my pet subject, the climate crisis or environmental issues or whatever you want to call it. Because the media just seem to have to keep pushing up all of the effects that the quote unquote climate crisis is having. And the bar keeps being pushed up and up and up and up, and it's frankly because people aren't buying what they're saying anymore. And a great example is The Guardian. They have an entire section on the climate crisis. It comes right after world news, by the way. And just take a look at some of these headlines. World facing hellish 3 degrees of climate heating, UN warns before COP28. WA, I think that's Washington, climate activists to appeal against conviction for denying police access to mobile and laptop. Apparently that's headline news for the climate crisis section of The Guardian. National Trust calling on UK governments to improve climate resilience, well of course they are. And as you can pretty see from all of the other headlines, they are effectively things about billionaires. And this honestly is a bit white-pilling to me, because this shows that the climate crisis really is on its last legs for trying to push that type of agenda, because they've had to spill over into every other type of socialist or leftist issue, in that inequality is bad, billionaires are bad, etc, etc. I mean, you got 4 in a row there about billionaires. First one's about Elon Musk, second about 12 billionaires, third's about Jeremy Hunt being told that you need to tax corporations more, even though the windfall tax at 75%. And then again, the last one, richest 1% account for more carbon emissions than poorest 66%. And even those bottom two have to bring in inequality and the Republican-controlled school board that voted against climate textbooks. I mean, even having a quick look at that one, the rejected textbooks include climate crisis policy solutions, and Conservative board members criticise them for being too negative about fossil fuels, a major industry in the state. Texas leads the nation in the production of crude oil and natural gas. So I'm just going to throw it out there. If anywhere in your book it says climate crisis, unironically, that is a book of propaganda. And the rest of the article is just constantly saying Republican. Oh, they have shares in oil companies. Oh, the board was influenced by railroad commissioners. Which again, is a major criticism I have of The Guardian. They never do that the other way. They'll just say, oh, the Democrats, the good guys, were saying, oh, we don't know what you want to see for the climate change syllabus then, and probably won't mention if they're climate activists or anything like that. But having a look at the big headline there, the world facing hellish 3 degrees of climate heating, UN warns, we must start setting records on cutting emissions, UN boss says, after temperature records obliterated in 2023. I'd like to point out at this part of the video that in the United Kingdom we have managed to reduce our carbon emissions right down to 1855 levels. We are on the same level as we were as the Industrial Revolution was really ramping up. That's actually really impressive and world leading, but you will never see that in a Guardian headline, as we have shown. All you'll see in a Guardian headline is we are all going to die. I mean, just look at the CO2 emissions graph there on the left as well. The UK have basically no input when it comes to carbon emissions, and absolutely nobody complains about China. Take from that what you will. My take is that world leaders do not want to annoy the country with the biggest manufacturing sector where they have outsourced all their manufacturing, because it's cheaper. Anyway, to the article. The world is on track for a hellish 3 degrees of global heating, the UN has warned, before the crucial COP28 climate summit that begins next week in the UAE. Oh, that's even funnier. They're a net exporter of fossil fuels. I'm not even joking, they make like $60 billion a year on crude oil, and then it's something like another 40 billion on refined oil. 100 billion a year their GDP is, based in fossil fuels. This is just a joke. The report found that today's carbon cutting policies are so inadequate that 3 degrees of heating would be reached by this century. Temperature records have already been obliterated in 2023, and identifying heat waves, floods and droughts have taken lives and hit livelihoods across the globe. In response to a temperature rise of just 1.4 degrees to date, I'd love to know if they would give the starting date for that, because it is typically from the mid-1800s when we had an unusually low temperature climate during that period. Scientists say far worse is to come if the heat continues to rise, and the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, has repeatedly said the world is heading for a hellish future. The UN Environmental Programme report said that implementing future policies already promised by countries would shave 0.1 degrees off the 3-degree limit, putting in place emissions cut pledges by developing countries on condition of receiving financial and technical support would cut the temperature rise to 2.5 degrees, still a catastrophic scenario. Which I think is my favourite thing about all these IPCC reports. They are effectively constantly telling us this is absolutely pointless because it will just destroy every economy if we actually try and do it, and all it will effectively do is only cut emissions by and cut temperature by maybe, I don't know, 20%, if that, and if we are lucky. When realistically the better thing to do, as Bjorn Lomborg constantly goes on about, is to keep the economies flourishing and then deal with the problems as they come down the line, because these things are going to change slowly and we can actually prepare for them and make the necessary changes to reduce the damage. For example, installing everywhere with air conditioning in the UK, especially in the south where it gets warm, improving sea defences should sea levels rise to a dangerous degree, and obviously put a load of money into conservation projects because, well, we all like to save animals. Inga Anderson, the UNEP executive director, said there is no person or economy left on the planet untouched by climate change. Well, yeah, duh. That's been true since the start of time. There's nowhere on Earth that hasn't been untouched by climate change. The climate's been changing all the time. So we need to stop setting unwanted records on emissions, temperatures, and extreme weather. We must instead lift the needle out of the same old groove of insufficient action and start setting other records on cutting emissions and on climate finance, which the UK has done, and it has not helped. The UN warned earlier in November that the world's fossil fuels producers are planning expansions that would blow the planet's carbon budget twice over, which experts called insanity. Which experts are these? IPCCs, the people paid to say it's insane? Another recent report found that the state oil company of the UAE, whose CEO, Sultan Al Jaber, will preside over COP28 and has the largest net zero busting expansion plans of any company in the world. Well, yes, that just really goes to show how silly this entire thing is. Effectively, all COP meetings are huge wastes of money for a ceremony for everyone to effectively pray to the god of climate change and say, I am so sorry, we will keep sacrificing our prosperity to try and save the planet. And realistically, it's just not going to happen. They've had 27 of these COPs, and every time they are saying the same thing. Oh my god, this is getting so much worse. At what point do you have to say that these things are just completely pointless and helping no one? Anyway, as pointed out before, The Guardian also likes to go on about the very rich, so richest 1% account for more carbon emissions and poorest 66%. Imagine my shock. Polluter elite are plundering the planet to the point of destruction, says Oxfam after comprehensive study of climate inequality. Well, this is my favourite part of the whole thing. I don't know how Oxfam is still running as a charity when it seems that every time they are in the news, it is to point out that somewhere in a senior position in Oxfam, they were effectively human trafficking and paying the people that they should have helped for sex. It just seems like one of those awful corrupt charities, and I honestly would not recommend you give them any of your money. The charity shops on the street, give them, clothes you don't need anymore or things like that, that's fine. But don't donate to Oxfam. But this is just how crazy the leftists are. There is no dissemination between all of their problems. All of their problems come down to rich people exist, therefore problem gets worse. And we'll go through how silly that thought process is in just a second. The richest 1% of humanity is responsible for more carbon emissions than the poorest 66%, with dire consequences for vulnerable communities and global efforts to tackle the climate emergency, report says. The most comprehensive study of global climate inequality ever undertaken shows that the elite group made up of 77 million people, including billionaires, millionaires, and those paid more than $140,000 a year, accounted for 16% of all carbon emissions in 2019, enough to cause more than 1 million excess deaths due to heat, according to the report. So this is clearly trying to say the 1% in Western standards, but then at the same time compare it to the economic situation of the entire world. Well, really, if you were going to do that, you'd have to get to the real figure, which I believe is somewhere in the 30 to 40,000 US dollars a year zone. That would make you a 1% in worldwide standards, but The Guardian aren't doing that because most people who buy The Guardian earn under thousand US dollars so they can feel good about themselves. And of course, there's nothing to be said in this article for how much investment these billionaires and millionaires are putting into things to try and fight global carbon emissions, such as investment into, say, carbon capture storage maybe, or investment into renewable energy, including nuclear and things like that. No, they just have to point out that they're on planes all the time. And don't get me wrong, there is complete hypocrisy in all of the billionaires saying, we really should worry about the climate crisis, and then at the same time they're lifting rockets up into space, and their supply chain requires worldwide trade of, say, rare earth minerals from Africa to be flown to China to then be put together and refined and then flown back to America to be purchased by people who earn under 140,000 US dollars. But this is just how absurd the entire base of the article and the report even is. For a start, yeah, no duh, rich people have more carbon emissions than anyone else. They are the people who have the potential to put the most carbon emissions in the air. And at the same time, there's a total disconnect to, well, how are they making that money? Oh, the people under 140,000 are paying them for fuel, oil, plastic gloves, basically everything made from crude oil and fossil fuels. But these articles just get so tedious even after 2 paragraphs, I'm not even going to bother to read anymore because they're all so predictable and tedious. And all these are really there to do is to push people more to radicalism. That's all it ever seems to do. And the best example where I can show this quickly is when Jacob Rees-Mogg had an argument on GB News with that Just Stop Oil protester who threw soup on the painting in the art gallery, which is just going to mean that going into free art galleries is going to be a much bigger pain in the Western world. Anyway, here's the clip.
Always had weather events that have affected crops, but that actually using fossil fuels for fertilizers and moving on to genetic modification of crops has enormously increased the yield. That since Malthus rate, we've increased agricultural productivity by about 2% per annum.
So there's Jacob Rees-Mogg making a very, very salient point, I must say, about the fact that, well, thanks to fossil fuels, we've managed to get to a point where we effectively just don't have to worry about food whatsoever. Food is insanely cheap, even during the cost of living crisis, especially when compared to previous generations, and our yields are only getting larger and larger and larger. And if you follow Bjorn Lomborg, he shares headlines like this all the time, because for years and years and years and years you will have scare stories from The Guardian saying, oh, we're not going to have enough crops, we're not going to be able to buy any bread in the shops anymore because the yields will be too low. And then you get stories like this. Lincolnshire grower Tim Lamyman, the new holder of the Guinness World Record for the highest wheat and barley yields. Record for Mr. Layman of Lamyman Warbly Farms in Louth came from a wheat crop which yielded 17.96 tonnes per hectare and a barley crop which weighed at 16.2 tonnes a hectare. Both crops were grown in 2022 and were entries in the UK's Yield Enhancement Network annual awards. In other words, we keep breaking records for crop yields. In other words, food is getting an even bigger surplus than before. And what does the Just Stop Oil activist have to say?
Jacob, you have 6 children. Do you not care about their future? Do you not care about them being able to feed themselves? Because right now, under this government's policies, your 6 children are heading towards a future that is filled with life-threatening extreme weather events, crop failures, famine, war.
Yeah, none of that's true. It doesn't matter how much the scare stories come out. It doesn't matter how much The Guardian tries to say, oh, we're now going to have 3-degree rises and the whole of the UK is going to turn into a desert. So that's obviously hyperbole. The opposite seems to be happening. We seem to be getting more food than ever. We seem to be having more forest expansion than ever. The main reason we're having floods is because flood defences are terrible and we're not putting money towards that infrastructure. Instead, we're putting money towards replacing petrol cars and replacing the infrastructure that's working perfectly fine for petrol cars, instead of actually doing anything useful with the money, because we're run by a bunch of clowns. But it's not just The Guardian who are doing this. Channel 4 decided to put out this really weird advert.
Welcome aboard. Our flight time today will be 14 minutes. Bring it back to flow, give it that back it flow, give it that back it flow, give it back it flow, give it that back it flow, give it.
Yes, I'm sorry, but I had to see this advert while I was watching All 4, therefore you have to. But the message is clear here, just rich people bad. That's it, that's the message, because That's the only thing that the leftists really have to go on at this point, and if you don't think Channel 4 is run by leftists and you don't think The Guardian's run by leftists, I don't know what to tell you. And of course, for some reason, the BBC derived most of its editorials from The Guardian, and Channel 4 seemed to follow suit from The Guardian as well, so this whole propaganda push is just getting much worse, but on the bright side, it does show that it's really got many legs to stand on. Nobody takes cops seriously, nobody takes climate activism seriously, and the best they can do now is show adverts with rich people in underpants with oil stains on them. Great.
As you can see, record profits in the third quarter.
I mean, I really don't have to show you more of the dancing. This is literally a minute-long advert where 50 seconds of it is just people in underpants with black stains on them, dancing around like total fools, which I get is the point. They're trying to say, oh, aren't these rich people total fools? But that's about as skin-deep as the criticism gets, and of course Parliament get a slap in the face with this too. Just really, I have nothing to say about this other than it's really childish and is a really bad satire of rich people in Parliament anyway.
We're worried about our carbon footprint. But are those with power doing enough about their carbon skid mark? To change climate season, watch now on Channel 4.
So you'd think from that bit at the end, this is going to be an entire season of television coming from Channel 4 that is even more scare stories about climate change and that rich people bad, Parliament bad. We're going to have a whole dispatches on how Jacob Rees-Mogg is literally funding people to make climate change worse because he's evil. Well, because that advert actually said so little about what they are going to do, they had to come up with their own statement on their websites to actually say what the advert was supposed to be for. Channel 4's in-house creative agent for Creative has launched a striking campaign for Channel 4's Change Climate season featuring the business and political elite as you've never seen them before in their carbon skid-marked underpants. I really didn't need a paragraph explaining what I just saw. The campaign builds upon the premise that historically individuals have been at the centre of the focus when it comes to making behavioural changes to reduce their carbon footprint. This bold film calls out the actions and inactions of those in positions of power, such as politicians and the CEOs of big businesses, questioning the extent to which they are doing enough. I love how they have to just explain their point. Because one, it's ridiculous because it's just so childish, it's obvious, but I love how they are just saying, yeah, this is childish, but it's bold. When literally anyone could do this. The only reason this doesn't look cheap is because they've brought expensive cameras. That's the only reason. Nick Moran, head of brand campaigns, Channel 4, said, when it comes to climate change, the focus is often on individuals to try harder, which can lead to feelings of guilt, anxiety and helplessness, especially amongst younger generations. At Channel 4, we believe in our mission to challenge with purpose as we ask our audiences, are those with power doing enough to combat the climate crisis? While parliaments have decided to tax the absolute pants off energy companies and on anything to do with fossil fuels, while at the same time trying to subsidise absolutely every green investment you can think of, all that's resulted in is, as I've covered many times before, less investment in the UK energy market, and the most recent news is that there has literally been no bids for offshore wind, even though it is subsidised by the government, and we are constantly told it's a really good investment because it makes cheap energy, therefore more people will want to buy it. Well, clearly the business leaders do not agree. And you can blame that on the system all you want, but the fact of the matter is that the system is so in favour of green energy, it is unbelievable, and even with all that help, businesses still don't want to get involved in it. They still want more oil and gas. Because we are not, and are probably never going to be at the point where we can be 100% reliant on these clean, renewable energy sources. You're gonna have to go nuclear. You're gonna have to rely on hydrogen. It's just reality. I mean, having said this, the article does say that there were bids put on for onshore wind and solar, but the fact of the matter is that it really should be the easiest thing in the world to bid for offshore wind. It's really easy to make them. You have all the space in the world. There's hundreds of wind turbines near me offshore, but the businesses say it's just not profitable. So I don't know what you're supposed to take from that. Anyway, the rest of that article is literally just a description of what's happened in the advert. And really, if it was just this that Channel 4 were doing, I wouldn't be making a video. I'd just say offhand in another video on a stream, oh, who cares, this is just childish. But no, Channel 4 also put out a programme a few months ago now, where Chris Packham, who is a wildlife TV presenter and conservationist, they made a programme called Is It Time to Break the Law? I'm not joking, that is the actual title of the show, and if you are a fan of watching the media, typically if they are putting out a question like that, it usually answers no. However, you have to see a clip that they actually put up on national broadcast for the world to see.
It's time to make up my own mind and decide if I think it's time to break the law.
The fact he's even thinking about that, should I go and commit crime in the name of saving the climate catastrophe? As if anyone breaking the law has actually changed anything. The reason that the UK government constantly sides with green energy, I gotta tell you, it's not because of all the eco-activists that you see on the streets shutting down cities. They don't care about them. It's because of the higher class new elite influences that are all over the actual institutions with power throughout the world, including the UN, including the EU, including obviously the Paris Agreement. And so because of that, they want to maintain good standings with the world and the world's elites, and therefore they keep trying to push world record-breaking reduction in carbon emissions. And they actually do a pretty good job of it. We have done quite well as a country to reduce carbon emissions, but you get no recognition for it. And Channel 4 still thinks that you should break the law to make sure that we have no carbon emissions whatsoever. It's crazy.
An overwhelming number of people recognise that we are in danger. They fear for their own lives, children, frightened for the future of life on Earth.
I'm just loving this absolutely schizophrenic clip of Chris Packham. How anyone can see this and think that it was made by anyone sane is beyond me. The politicians, they're trying to destroy the planet, all the corporations, they're not taking the issue seriously. And the best part is, this is how he finishes off his schizophrenic rant.
They haven't been listening to us, the climate activists.
I love how the conversation's moved away from, you need to listen to the science, listen to scientists, But then the problem is that the activists take all the worst low-confident parts of the quote-unquote science and read it to everyone as if it's gospel. And the fact of the matter is that that is not what the science says. They don't like referencing the science anymore, because while the IPCC does give you worst-case scenarios, they never have high confidence in it. It's like the IPCC article about 3-degree rise in the future. It's only mentioned in the summary for policymakers about 3 times, and every time it's just here's a predicted scenario. By the way, here's also 1.5 degrees increase, 2-degree increase, 4-degree increase. 1.5 is the most likely. As you go up, there's less confidence. That's all it says. And yet, The Guardian, Channel 4, every climate activist, they will take the... not even the worst case, because they know they can't get away with saying the worst case, but they'll take one of the worst cases that isn't too extreme that they can find to try and push it as gospel. And it ends up with crazy situations like this, where you have Chris Packham having a schizophrenic episode about the climate crisis, and, well, let's see if he does think we should commit crime.
Now, I'm not asking for anyone to break the law. There are so many lawful ways to get involved.
The good old, for some reason, very modern mannerisms of saying, now, I'm not asking anyone to do the bad thing, but...
However, for me, myself...
You gotta love it. This is what I mean in the title by Stochastic Terrorism. This is Stochastic Terrorism. Now, while you can do all this in lawful ways, and I'm not asking you to do anything unlawful, for me, the person that you are listening to for this advice, I think I'm willing to break the law. That's what he's about to say.
But I've got to raise my voice. If you're an activist that's already made a decision that, yes, you're going to break the law, so long as no one is hurt, then you'll have my support.
So there you go. It's so stupid. I can't believe this actually managed to get onto the air and not be investigated by Ofcom. This is a call for people to commit crimes. Now, I know he says in it, oh, I'm not calling for anyone to commit crimes, but if you're saying you'll support people who commit crimes, you are encouraging people to become criminals. That is encouraging crime. I don't care what you say. No, you cannot have people on television saying, yes, I support people committing crimes. And don't get me wrong, I do think that there are stupid laws, but under no circumstances am I going to encourage people to break, say, the 2003 Malicious Communications Act, I don't think you should do it, even in protest, because it's absolutely stupid to break a law, and also it's illegal to encourage people to break laws. Yet we have had this on Channel 4, and this all stems from the stupid and poor journalism that's coming from all sorts of climate crisis sections of The Guardian or Channel 4 or BBC. And you never see anything positive as a result of climate change, such as more forest density, such as higher crop yields, such as less deaths from cold. And it all ends up with the Channel 4 climate change season where they encourage you to break the law. It's crazy how they can get away with that.
And personally, I think I've reached a point where I now consider it the ethically responsible thing to do.
It just complete stochastic terrorism. Oh, I'm not calling for anyone to break any laws in the name of fighting the climate crisis, but I do think it is the ethical thing to do. You're an ethical person if you do that. Yeah, that's obviously going to encourage people to commit crimes. It's insane that he has not been charged for encouraging criminal acts. But as I say, on the bright side of all this, it appears that climate activism is becoming the more uncool thing, and it's really losing its footing. The best example of this, once again, is to go back to Just Stop Oil. Because while they still do their standard blocking of roads, slowing down traffic and things like that, they're broadening their horizons for what they're protesting against, and that really is a death knell for any sort of protest group, because it shows that what you originally protested for is no longer in the public eye, and people don't really care about it as much. Because once again, going back a few months, they tried to stop a coach full of illegal migrants being transported to a detention centre where they are going to be processed, and here's a video of how that went. Yes, this was the coach driver just ignoring all the people shouting, "Stop, there's people in front of you," because obviously he can see it. I think my other favourite part of this video is that you can clearly see the immigrants inside the van just laughing at the protesters. Because being a climate activist or just any sort of protester is obviously such a thankless job, because even the people that it is supposedly benefiting think you're absolutely crazy and just frankly laugh at you. I mean, they keep trying to fall back, reposition, say, "Oh no, sit down, just get in the middle of the road." But you'll see here, this coach driver just doesn't care. No, he's going, look at them, have no conviction, nah, rather just save themselves. Clearly they are not dedicated to the cause enough to actually get in the way of a coach that's about to run them over. And, yeah, the migrants inside as well. They're just laughing about the whole thing. Because this is how much of a joke Just Stop Oil is at the moment. And not only that, but they also expanded over into, you know, justice for Palestine. Ooh, Israel need to stop shooting and fighting back against the Hamas terrorists that killed thousands of their own. Because what does any of this have to do with the climate crisis? Well, apparently the idea is that being against the climate crisis means that you're against genocide, because the climate crisis means genocide, and therefore, because Israel are apparently genociding Gazans, which they are doing in a very odd way by doing their best not to genocide civilians, while Hamas are using them as human shields, it's a crazy way to try and justify the expansion into protesting against Israel. But the reality of the situation is that other leftists have said that it is good to be on Gaza's side, therefore you need to be on Gaza's side. And again, the white pilling part of this is that this means that going on and on and on about the climate crisis has less legs than ever. Extinction Rebellion went on for 2 or 3 years, I think, and then they were replaced by Just Stop Oil. Just Stop Oil have had their 2 or 3 years in the light, and I can't see any other group coming forward to replace them at this point. And it's usually at this point where you would see a replacement group, but you're simply not seeing it. However, this unfortunately does mean that they are upping their game for how they are protesting and damaging property.
Women and girls are more vulnerable to the effects of climate change. They are less likely to be in positions of power or decision-making roles.
I mean, already you saw at the beginning they're smashing up the glass of a painting in a British art gallery yet again, and already their promo material is already venturing out yet again, not to Gaza or Palestine, not to illegal migration. No, they're going on about feminism now. I mean, honestly, next week you'll probably see them protest trans rights, given it's Trans Day of Remembrance. But yes, once again, this global epidemic happening, women most affected.
Women did not get the vote by voting.
I mean, they also seem to just be getting more and more moronic. Because their argument there is clearly, well, women had to do extreme things to get the vote, which for a start they didn't. The suffragettes actually probably pushed back women voting by a good 5 to 10 years. And secondly, you can vote. So doing these other things is actually breaking the quote-unquote social contract, whatever you want to say it, because you actually have the power and influence to vote and have your say in how we deal with these issues. Just because they're unpopular doesn't give you the right to commit these crimes.
It is time for deeds and not words. It is time to just stop oil.
I mean, that's all I'm going to play now from that clip because they're all just becoming monotonous. Oh, they're doing slightly more extreme things now. Isn't that fantastic and completely predictable? And you know what's going to make it worse? Channel 4 encouraging people and saying that you're an ethical person if you do these things, and The Guardian constantly reporting worst case scenarios when there's not even high confidence that they're even going to happen. Anyway, final white pill of the day. Phoebe Plummer, that pink-haired mentalist who threw soup on the Van Gogh painting and had a go at Jacob Rees-Mogg, she's been given 6 months prison sentence for, as Just Stop Oil says, marching. She is one of 6 Just Stop Oil supporters in prison in the last 14 days, the others of which, of course, were done for quote-unquote marching. But I think the stupidest thing is that they actually put her response to the judge as she was being sentenced here. Phoebe defiantly stated, "I will continue to march while they continue to license new oil and gas and coal. How many more children have to die before you listen? How many more floods have to wipe out entire villages? Blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah." Oh, climate crisis, isn't it terrible? Anyway, she was asked if she'd commit crimes because she's on probation and because she openly stated, "Yes, I will continue to commit crimes and break my probation." That's why she was given 6 months. It's not for marching, it's for breaking her probation because you're not allowed to constantly stop traffic. Anyway, with that, I think we can safely say that we are starting to see some of the white pills coming out of this clown decade, where the police are actually doing their job, arresting these people and actually imprisoning them with the new legislation brought in by Suella Braverman, who unfortunately is now gone. Because unfortunately there's a hell of a lot more black pills to give out because things are going to get worse. You're probably going to see more extremism from the climate cultists. I don't think it's going to get to an extreme of a point where you are going to see the bombing of Parliament or anything like that. But I think they are going to constantly try and push the line out further and further and further, and you will see genuine direct death as a result of these protests. Because it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter how much the government actually cuts carbon emissions, these people are, for a lack of a better term, completely crazy. They will believe any doomsday narrative that comes out from any person that claims that they are talking in the name of science, because it's just what happens when you don't have a religion, or at least a good moral framework. It's what happens when you're a pure nihilist. Because at the end of the day, if you don't believe in something, you will literally just believe in anything, no matter how much evidence is against it, and no matter how much good work is being done. That's just the truth of it. This is going to get worse, unfortunately. But I threw a few white pills in there, so, you know, don't call me a black pill merchant. Anyway, there will be another video out this week at some point, and of course, Laughing at the Guardian returns on Saturday. So I cannot wait to see you there. Once again, subscribe, like, favourite, share it with all your friends and family. I want to get this channel growing, you know. I've been stuck at just under 8,000 subscribers for about 3 years now, and I actually feel I'm at a point in my life where I want to focus quite a lot more on this, and the best way to do that is to make it economically viable, and the way to do that is obviously with your support, and obviously I appreciate all of your support. So with that, that's everything I had for you today, so once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.